Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this, the 10th of the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management's Turbulent Times webinar series. I'm very pleased to say that our guest today is Dave Coplin, founder and chief envisioning officer for his own consultancy, the Envisioners. Before that, he spent 12 years at Microsoft, where he performed the role of chief envisioning officer. Calls himself a tech evangelist and, intriguingly, a pragmatic optimist. I like that. And he's booked worldwide to speak on the role of tech and how it can empower those who use it. He says he's on a mission to help organisations and individuals see the full potential that technology offers to a modern digital society. And for him, it's not so much about the tech, rather it's about the humans and the balance between tech capability and genuine human requirements. To which end, he has a regular webinar series, Rise of the Humans, available on YouTube, and episode 8 of which goes out live at 6 this evening. We'll come back to that as part of the conversation. Important to point out also that now I think the next slide shows the conference. Is that right? Maybe not, we'll move on. Dave is appearing at the IWFM Conference on the 25th of September. Of course, the lockdown uncertainty we've all lived through has only served to compound concerns over things like automation of jobs and job roles. And at the conference, he will be addressing what a 2018 IWFM report worryingly identified as an ambivalence kind of amongst workplace and facilities managers towards emerging technology, and in particular, big ticket stuff, big data, artificial intelligence. They see it often as happening to them rather than something they can embrace to empower and enhance their role. They will specifically address that issue at the conference. It may well creep into what we talk about over the course of this next 45 minutes. With machine learning dubbed the most important general purpose technology of our time, how do we future-proof the profession, this one, to ride that data wave? Looking forward to that in September. So the first thing to point out is that we'd love to see questions from you as we go through this conversation. We've got plenty to talk about for sure, but certainly as we go through, feel free to ask questions of Dave. I'll see them as they come up on the screen and put them to him as the conversation progresses or towards the end. So without further ado, let's move on to slide number 1, please. Thank you very much. The end of command and control. Well, subhead for that one, how do workplace managers' roles need to evolve? Obviously, we're living through very interesting times these last 3 to 4 months. It's undoubtedly the case that workplace and facilities managers are assessing, already have had to deal with very much the pragmatic physical component of preparing their businesses for work. What does it mean in the longer term? So Dave, here we go. The massive step of losing line of sight management. What's the likely impact on those who provide and manage the workplace?
Well, I think they've got to recognise that what's happened to us over the last 12 weeks and what will continue to happen to us for the foreseeable future represents a massive cultural change in how we think about work. The organisations that are going to do best are going to be those that wean themselves off the command and control sort of style of management. And you know, these are the people who typically in the organisation, they like to send the bums on seats memo. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I can't see Dave, he's probably not working. And instead flip into organisations who are all about empowerment. And these are organisations who culturally measure not by process, but by outcomes. And so I think a role for this audience, or the objective for this audience, is to understand what that means in terms of the workplace and how that sort of comes to fruition. It's going to be a bumpy ride. We've been talking about this change, you know, for at least a decade. The whole opportunity of flexible working at its core is this fundamental cultural change of leadership style, but it's hard. And it's hard for lots of people in the organization. In particular, it's the middle managers who will struggle most with this. So I think it's about empowerment, it's about helping those people understand the opportunity, but it's also about creating a workplace that is fit for purpose for that cultural change.
So in much of what you've said, we'll come on to the skills a bit later, actually, because this all comes into a whole range of different skills components. You've talked about how the future workplace is going to have to be warm and friendly, inviting. You talk about outside-in thinking. Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. Outside-in thinking is literally, and it's you know, it's blindingly obvious, but it's understanding what it feels like to be an employee or to be a customer, and especially right now. And most of the organizations I'm working with right now, they're thinking about how do we reopen, what does the business proposition look like, what do we do for our employees, and they're beginning to recognize that, for example, their employees are in a spectrum of different states of minds. At one extreme of the spectrum, you'll have those that are desperate, to be back in the office, for whatever reason. They want that buzz, they want to be there. At the other end, you'll have people who are maybe fearful about the situation, maybe they're still shielding somebody, and so we've got to put ourselves in those people's shoes, and rather than thinking about ourselves and our role and how we manage the facilities, we've got to be thinking about how would I feel if I walked into that organization as a customer? How are they going to feel if they walk into the organization? What are they going to see? If you can connect to that, then you can start to build services or things that people will actually enjoy and relate to. The challenge is, historically in offices, we've kind of felt, we've delivered a one size fits all. And I know that's a bit of an approximation, but we can't do that anymore. We have to recognize that there is a very broad range of sort of expectations. And the challenge now is, how do we cater for as many of them as possible?
Do you think that's happening at pace? I mean, obviously, we have a situation where many people are, slowly reopening in different sectors. They're having all these physical signage, thinking of different safe rooms, and this whole issue of creating people's safety. Is that bringing it front of mind already, do you think?
Oh, without a doubt. And again, the organizations I see doing this well are the ones that are thinking not of, we're going to reopen and then that's it. Is we're going to reopen and then we're going to evaluate and we're going to listen. We're going to see what, how employees feel. We're going to tweak as we go. And that's why I think, we talk broadly about the 3 phases of the pandemic. There was the shutting everything down. There was the preparing to open. And then there's what people love to call the post-pandemic new normal. But the reality is, these are not sort of single phases. They are they're going to evolve, they're going to emerge. And I think the challenge for you guys is you've got to be there on that journey, and you've got to be looking for those signals, and you've got to be working with the organization to say, what are we going to adjust, how do we change? Because people's expectations will dramatically change, certainly over the next 6 months, but I would argue over an even longer period than that.
Okay. I think it's logical now to move to the next slide, because that connects in with what you've just said. So can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, the end to office centricity. I mean, I know that you're particularly keen on people who have made big commitments to understanding that things will not return to exactly where we were. But we've kind of been here before to a certain extent. The London Olympics 2012 example is the one I know you've mentioned, where, okay, it was limited. It was obviously a far smaller number of people. It was London specific. But there are so many different factors to the individuals in the individual workers, their life circumstances when they're considering the options they've got. And also, this, I mean, fundamentally changes the trust dynamic, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, let's unpack a few of those things, Martin. So sure. First of all, London Olympics was a great little experiment, but the reason I talk about it is I remember, for the first week of the London Olympics, all of the articles that, well, isn't it brilliant? We can work from home. Oh God, this is amazing. It's going to be the future, this. And then literally the day the Olympics finished, it's like, oh, thank God for that. I'm heading back into the office. And what I'm really worried about is the biggest opportunity, and perhaps for me, one of the biggest silver linings on this terrible experience that we've all endured, is that every single office worker in the country and around the world has had to, for 12 weeks, experience the joys and the nightmares of working remotely. And what we've got to do now is we know the best and worst, right? So this isn't about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So this isn't about never going back to the office, but this is thinking about, well, what is the best of that experience that I've had over the last 12 weeks, and how can I perpetuate that going forward? And I think organizations have got to lean into that. They've got to work with their people to figure out the balance. But here's the rub. You can't just do it on an organizational level. Remember back what I was saying earlier, that individuals have got all different perspectives. And I think there's, at least 6 different sort of principles of flexible working. It depends on your age, your family status, where you are in your career, all of these things. And so organizations have got to build a flexible working approach that caters for everybody. The gift that I would hate us to lose is we've seen that it works now. We've broken many of our cultural taboos. You know, video calling is one. I would bet many of your people out in the audience have probably done more video calls in the last 12 weeks than ever before. And I would argue probably many of them, you know, would never have done a video call. It would always been easier to do it by phone. So we've discovered the joy of this stuff, and it actually works. And we've also got over the other cultural barriers. Do you remember when we would do conference calls, particular, but sometimes video calls before all of this, and you'd be like telling the kids to shut up, and I'd be getting the dogs out of the room, and I've got to present this professional. You know, look, we're all at home. You know, some of us have kids, some of us have dogs, some of us get Amazon deliveries. It's called life. And we've got over that problem now. So culturally, we're actually in a really good place to accept it. But don't for a minute think that that means that we never need to go back into the office. My ideal would be that we find a way of flipping it. So, and again, it's a caricature, right? But a lot of the people I know, their approach to flexible working was Monday to Friday, I'm in the office. Friday, I work from home. That's flexible working. Well, actually, no, sorry, that's working from home on a Friday. Flexible working should be actually Monday to Friday. I'm going to work from the location that's most appropriate. It might be my home. It might be a local work hub. Who knows? But I'm only going to go into the office when I absolutely need to. And if we can flip that default, that would be, I think, one of the best legacies from this horrible experience that we've had to endure.
Of course, what that does is that makes the workplace and facilities manager's role all the more complex. It's complex enough. There are so many issues of compliance to juggle. There are so many issues of different teams with different requirements. That's quite an ask, isn't it, of the profession?
It's huge, and it's almost like you know, we're going to need to deconstruct what we do or disassemble what we do and then rebuild it into something entirely different. And I don't think we should be shy about doing that. And I think, you know, this speaks to the core of really what I've been about for the last 30 years. You know, technology enables us to do different things in different ways. Yeah, it's good at replicating the way we used to do stuff, and sometimes it can make it quicker or cheaper. But if we only ever replicate what we used to do, we actually never discover the potential of the new stuff that we could do. And you know, I argue that if you look at many of our workplace processes, they're the same processes that we had in Victorian times. You know, so we are in the 21st century. We still work like we're Victorians. It's just we use 21st century technology to make it quicker and cheaper. That's not the gift. So the challenge, you know, I would lay to you in this audience is, how do we figure out that? And again, there's a baby in this bathwater too. Let's not throw out all the lessons that we've learned, but how do we create something that's fit for purpose for this decentralized, feathered world of work that actually empowers people to use the technology to do, you know, better work, to be more productive, to be, you know, better for the environment, more cost effective, all of these great opportunities that we've seen firsthand over the last 12 weeks.
Sure. Okay. I mean, it's impossible to avoid the skills component of this, so I think we should move to the next slide straight away. Now, this one's tackling the post-COVID skills gap. There we go. It's also about leadership characteristics, and there's some very good material in your Rise of the Human series about just that only recently. Tech ignorance is no longer acceptable. Leaders who, I mean, we'll come on to the general training of people within teams, but in terms of, you know, people running the workplace, and indeed those people running the operations within the workplace, leaders who don't get digital will be of limited value in the future. Your guest, Aidan McCormack, talking about firms becoming cognitive gymnasiums and people becoming cognitive athletes. I thought that was nice. But it's all about individuals kind of permanently being in learn and adapt mode in a completely different way. In terms of skills, we're moving towards not just a different way of learning, but a different type of personal approach to what learning is. Is that a fair comment?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And you know, I don't know, my experience to date in my career. So I, you know, joined the world of work just before the arrival of the personal computer. So I witnessed what the old world was like, and then I saw the new world arrive. And you know, at the time, sort of the concept for most people was that if I learn this thing, if I learn computers, then I'm done, right? I don't need to learn anything else because now I know computers and I'm set for life. The reality is, and we know this in our personal lives now, is that you don't just learn this and then you're done. You learn it and then you learn the next thing, and then you learn the thing after that. And so this transition into lifelong learning, which I know sounds like a cat poster, but it in reality is about how do I make sure that every day my eyes are open and I'm looking for things that I could do better. I'm looking at skills that I might acquire. Look at the last 12 weeks. You know, if I was an employer, I would want to look in for my employees for the ones that are just rocking the whole, you know, virtual meeting thing. These are the ones that make sure that they've got the right lighting. They're the ones that make sure that they, you know, it's really tough when you're on those calls with like 30 people. How do you butt in? How do you do that in an appropriate way? How do you manage to move the productivity of the team forward? These are not new skills, but their importance becomes a lot greater. So I think it's about organizations and leaders and individuals really trying to figure that out as they move forward, but, you know, constantly trying to optimize it and not so much make the process better, but make the outcome better.
We've had a question in about the whole issue of workplace management in particular, looking across the distributed workplace, the third space, well, in particular the home office. How do we make it fit for purpose and health and safety compliant? Because one of the issues, of course, of people being in the workplace is that you can control that component. This whole experiment over the last 12 weeks has everyone's just got on with it. It's been government mandated, so there hasn't been the same kind of level of detail required in ensuring that each individual's home place is ergonomically friendly, etc. Again, that adds greater depth to the FM role, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, back to our conversation on command and control. You know, this is, you know, we can no longer dictate and execute to a certain extent you know, what that workplace environment is going to be like. Instead, we kind of have to do it by remote. We have to empower our people to say, look, this is what it's about, and this is why it's important, and this is what you need to do. The organization needs to support that, but we need individuals to take a bit more responsibility for it going forward. It can't be something that is done to them. And look, I know you guys you'll have a spectrum of customers. You know, some people will, well, you know, I need a workplace assessment before I can work, you know, and some people will be, you know, my back's killing, you know, actually we need to work. We've got to work through all of those issues. All of this is, how do we help people find the balance that works right for them? What can we do? The bit that we've got at the moment, I think, is we've got an opportunity in the mindset of people who are, you know, in a mindset of make, do and mend, if you like. So I'll put up with the fact that, you know, my kids are running around, or that my desk's not exactly perfect. I mean, I'm doing this, it looks flash, but right, I'm at the back of my front room. And you know, it works. You know, and you know, I'm very lucky to be in that situation. We've got good broadband, but it's about, if you could get the employees, you know, and we talked about engagement early on. When employees are engaged, they will, you know, tolerate is maybe the wrong word, but they'll work with you on finding the right approach. And so I think we've got to capitalize on that goodwill, if you've like. We've got to empower people. The organization needs to sponsor you guys to be able to make that happen. But if we get that right, I think we get individuals who are genuinely, it sounds patronizing, I don't mean it, but genuinely grateful to work for an organization that is empowering them in that way. And I think if we can do that, we solve so many problems.
Sure. The engagement piece is very interesting, of course, because everyone's had to be firmly engaged, and we've had all the electronic presenteeism elements, people logging on at specific times and looking to make sure that they're there. We've worked through that over the course of these weeks, haven't we? Do you think that people are in a particularly receptive time? Is this a particularly strong opportunity for this particular sector to embrace all the change that was kind of pent up maybe over the course of the last decade's worth of technological advance?
Yeah, I hope so. But I would sort of argue a little bit with your point. One of the things that I'm slightly worried about at the moment is this concept of presenteeism hasn't gone away. And actually, in some cases, I think it's got worse. So, you know, back when we were talking about this, you know, almost a decade ago, when I wrote the first book back in 2013, I think, presenteeism was about email, and it was about people who'd got mobile devices. Remember the Crackberries and that kind of era. And it was, you know, if the boss sends me an email at 10 o'clock at night, is the expectation that I respond? And we kind of, I'm not so much sure we dealt with that, but we kind of moved on and people felt a bit empowered. I look at a lot of organizations now and a lot of, my colleagues, and they're in organizations where they're on constant video calls, all day, every day. And I'm asking, so how much of that is actually important? You weren't in meetings all day, every day. And there's this element of I need to be seen. LinkedIn did a survey, during lockdown, and they're showing that sort of the average office worker is working an extra week every month. In this sort of presenteeism. So we're not getting more stuff done, it's just we're seen to be present and seen to be engaged. And I think that's massively problematic.
Isn't it collectively the case? I mean, you manager or managed, wherever you are in what is potentially a flatter hierarchy, of course, you're still, we're all trying to work this out for the first time. It's not just it's not just the managed once being seen to be performing by the manager. It's all of us.
No, totally. And it's this whole issue of trust again, right? And trust and empowerment. And what we need people to do is to really engage with the opportunity. I mean, two things, right? Number one, as an individual, take responsibility for your time. And so be confident in your contribution to the organization and avoid the temptation to want to constantly be seen online. And if you do that, that enables you to really focus on the, getting stuff done and getting the outcome of what you need to do. That requires a very specific culture, though, in the organization. So again, you need those confidence. If I could flip in just to another analogy, it's a bit like, so my son's obviously, like, if you've got kids, and certainly secondary age kids, you'll see how they've been learning over the last few weeks. And talking to him about it, the thing that I've really found is there's this wonderful sort of similarity between education and working flexibly, which is his best lessons are with the teachers who at the beginning of the week say, right, kids, this is what we're going to cover this week. I don't kind of care when you do the work, but we need to get the work done. And if the kids are then empowered to do that, they will then go away, they will manage their own time. And I get this only works with a certain age group. It needs to be secondary school age. But it's the same in the workplace. The best teams are the ones where the manager says, look, these are the outcomes. You're all grown-ups, you're all adults, figure it out, right? You figure out when it's best for you to work or how you're going to work with a team, but make sure we get the outcome sorted. If we get there, then I think this whole sort of presenteeism starts to drift away. And we use the meetings not only for the times when we only need them, but we also use them in a different way. We don't just use them to read through the things we could be reading through individually. We use it to genuinely connect with other people.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot there. The whole trust component is huge as to what that will mean for the future workplace. And I guess we're still in flux for sure. But there's no doubt about it. It's come up quite a lot in the pre-conversation discussion. This whole issue of here are markers or evidence of what I've achieved over the course of this day, etc., etc. My feeling is that started with a flurry. Everyone was absolutely, well, we can't see you. What are you doing? And that's and the nuances have crept in over the course of the last few weeks for sure. But yeah, definitely one to come back to. So in terms of questions, I've had a few that are coming in, which I think we can bring in as we go. You mentioned culture, and I am interested in both culture and in corporate identity and the element of competition between businesses as there is a more a diffused workplace out of sight. This question is, what kind of organization culture shift do you think we might see in this new world of working? So I guess the question is more broadly about the makeup of management of companies and the culture that they inculcate out to their workforce.
Well, I mean, so there's a lot there. I think one of the opportunities for us going forward is a very different approach to hierarchy. So, a diffused organization is by necessity and probably default a much flatter hierarchy, and it needs to be. And it's centered on this sort of principle of empowerment. It also brings us back to the importance of purpose. And I know that this is a really, complicated and in some cases cliched topic, but I genuinely believe if organizations can be really straightforward about what their purpose is, and when I say purpose, I don't mean your mission statement. Your mission statement is a love letter that you send to yourself. We're great, we make the best widgets, aren't we wonderful? Nobody but you cares about your mission statement. Your purpose is, what do we enable our customers to achieve as a result of us being us and doing what we do? If you can imbue that purpose in every employee, then when they are diffused and when they are decentralized, they carry that with them wherever they go, and they use that as their North Star to help guide them about, what activity should I prioritize, what do I need to do, what change do I need to implement. So I think if you have that open engagement, you have that open empowerment, and it's driven by a really good sense of purpose, these are the hallmarks, I think, of the organizations that are going to thrive in this world.
Okay, it's undoubtedly going to be very interesting to see how much of that comes through. I think we should probably move on now. I'm conscious we've got quite a few questions stacking up, and I want to make space for Q&A. So let's move on to the data dimension and AI. Thank you very much. The impact of machine learning and its potential to alter the way the workplace is structured. Obviously, this is hopefully the bread and butter question from your point of view. So I purposely put in there, it's about the workplace structure and what AI can do for that. I guess if you can maybe step back a bit and give us a sense of where you think we are in terms of use of AI. Obviously, some stuff that happens in the background already, but also whether or not organizations in general are understanding the potential and the impact it's going to have on them.
I think they are. I mean, we've moved beyond the sort of the usual IT bandwagon of big technology, big data, AI, cloud computing, and we're now into actually, I get how it works. The challenge specifically in the workplace, and we're seeing this actually in society play out in what's happening with COVID-19, is the data that we would really love to have is terrible from a privacy perspective. And it would take a really bold culture of organization to really want to lean into that. If I could give you an analogy, and I just happen to have mine on my desk because I was charging it, it's a bit like, so here's my Fitbit, and my Fitbit's really useful, right? Because it gives me insight into my behavior. And it, look, as you can probably tell, I'm no fitness fanatic, but it kind of just gives me a general sense. Do I need to be a bit more active? Do I need a bit more sleep? Whatever. And I can use that data to guide my behavioral change. And think about that on an organization level. What if you had a Fitbit for your organization? What if you could help your employees figure out how much sleep that individual needs to be most productive, or what activities they need to do? Wouldn't that be brilliant? It's kind of like coaches and athletes, isn't it? And then you look at the darker side of that. It was like, okay, so this is the data. And there was an article just a couple of days ago about one of the big consulting firms who's worried about insider dealing. How do we prevent people from doing insider trading in a world where we can't see what they're doing? I know, let's implement some software that monitors what screen they're looking at, what web page they're looking at, how long they're looking at it, how long they're absent from their PC. And I get that the goal is to meet the regulation, but from an individual's perspective, that's not right. So
yeah, the financial compliance is a really specific issue, isn't it? I mean, that is an absolute minefield, and this is a nightmare for them in terms of compliance.
Totally, but even if you've then got those sort of the well-meaning organizations who want to help their employees, genuinely want to help them be more productive, I would still be massively concerned about my employer knowing how much I sleep, how much I drink, what my diet's like. And I've gone to extremes there, but there's this balance that we've got to get to. So whilst people genuinely understand the opportunity of AI, we've got to take them on a journey with the value of the data, how we're going to show them that they can trust us to not be stupid with the data or not to abuse the data that we've been given, but at the same time allowing them to innovate with the data in ways that we've maybe not anticipated. So the tools are out there, certainly the sensors are all out there if we want to use them. This is, again, it's a cultural thing, it's a societal thing that we've got to come forward.
But is it also a skills thing though? I mean, that's a fundamental shift in skill set to be able to implement, to access and understand what you're doing.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I sort of talked about this a lot over the last few years, is, we typically, when we talk about data and AI, in our mind, we're picturing all of the, maths whiz kids and the computer scientist nerds, and they're the people that do data, right? Well, yeah, but actually we all do data. And companies like Microsoft and Google and others are making the tools that light up the value of data simpler and simpler. So increasingly, every member of the organization needs to kind of understand the basic principles of data. They need to understand issues around, algorithmic bias, for example, and so that they can ask the right questions, or they could, when they're trying to solve problems, they know the data that they're going to need. And I talk about it in the context of, every organization needs a data culture, so where everybody is engaged in that.
But how do you, that's, again, from a skills perspective, that's a giant leap from a workplace profession where, you're moving out of a fundamental service provision aspect to a lean back and understand what's coming out of that service that you're provided. And then looking forward, there's a lot of difficulty in calculating how much time and therefore cost you need to allocate to that part of the skills development process.
Yeah, no, totally. And also, let's not, this isn't about just relying entirely on data. It's about that blend of using the data to give you the insight, but then, adding your layer of human intuition and your experience of what you know about the organization and the industry to get to the right answer. So it's the best of both worlds. And I think that's one of the big challenges ahead, is how we really come to understand that. The data is going to get easier to acquire. We're going to have a societal conversation about the opportunity for this data and the pitfalls of it, and people slowly will emerge to a place that actually gives us an opportunity that's greater than where we are today.
Do you think, COVID crisis aside, do you think we were already on the cusp of some big leap forward there? Because it's fair to say the last 5 or 6 years has been all about well, in terms of being able to visualize it, Internet of Things, of course, the enabling technology, the enabling infrastructure. But in terms of the ability to say, okay, I can work with this tool, this gives me what I need, I can access it, I can then process information back to my employer. Do you think we're on the cusp of that becoming mainstream?
Yeah, I do actually, and I think one of the sort of stories that I've been telling for years is how our personal relationship with technology often holds us back, and it's based on a lack of experience. And what's happening now is we're using technology more and more and in more deeper ways in our personal lives, and we get the value there and we learn the lessons. And if I bring you back to an example, if you remember how upset we were at the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal and how wrong that was and all that, and we all deleted Facebook for like a week, and then we kind of moved back, but we moved back with acknowledgement of how the system works. And so I get how it works, I get some of its flaws, I like the value of it, so I'm going to use it in a way that actually minimizes the risk of those flaws and maximizes my opportunity. In the same way, this is the opportunity we've got going into the world of work with data. I will guarantee most of the people you care about, and indeed you yourselves, you're all doing great things with technology, and you've certainly been doing them for the last 12 weeks. You've been doing things that you probably never would have done before, and whether it's as simple as flipping all of your shopping to be online, or even me, right? Even me, and for years I've talked about this. It's only in the last month that I now have a regular family video call. My family's spread around the world, and it's hilarious. Why, of me of all people, why would it take this sort of experience for finally to push me over the edge to do it? But it's bloody wonderful. And so now I'm going forward and I'm carrying that experience with what I want to do. So I think there's a huge opportunity for organizations with the culture of people, with their eyes now much more open than they've ever been before about the opportunity of technology. Our job is to help guide them to use it well, and to empower them to explore it and to do it in a way that makes most sense for them.
Okay, thanks, Dave. We'll move on to the final slide. I should point out we've got quite a few questions coming in. So what I'm going to do, everyone, is just go through this final section with Dave, and then I'll bring in the questions that we've had. Rewiring routines. I guess we've covered the fact that so much about what's happening now and what's likely to happen is a question of rewiring. But the subhead for this is how firms need to make radical changes. We were talking offline about the potential for the situation we're now in to mean that people will, and organizations will look to introduce more local hubs and perhaps energize high streets by moving to a more distributed model for smaller premises. Do you think that's likely as one of the outcomes of what we're living through?
Oh God, I hope so. I really do. And there is, a sense of incredulity that I have used to have every day. Now I live in Banbury and commute into London, and often I'd be standing on the platform at 7 o'clock in the morning with 200 or 300 other people who I know, just like me, are going to go and sit at a specific location with a device that they've already got in their bag that they could be sitting at any other location. Now, for the most part, most of them aren't going to London because they need to see specific people. They're going to London because that's where their office is. And then you look at the high streets of the UK, and not just in Banbury, but you look about them, especially in the north, where we've got so many people who are stuck, gravitating around these, city hubs, when in reality we could be, the whole opportunity of technology is to, democratize that sort of capability. So I could literally live anywhere and still be able to be efficient in what I do for my company. And I think now's the time, now that we've all had that experience, now's the time that we should be looking at those third spaces. And all right, it's still difficult with social distancing, I get that, but I look at my sort of passengers on the platform, and I guarantee you many of us would be as happy in a shared space somewhere on Banbury High Street where there's a whiteboard and a coffee and all that sort of stuff, because I don't want it to be home's the place where I'm going to get massively distracted, right, for some of the things I need to do. And sometimes we talk offline and we talk about serendipity. I want to bump into people who maybe have got nothing to do with my organization and my industry, but maybe will help me connect a different thought or think in a different way. And I think now's the time for organizations to really think that through about what they could do, because economically it makes incredible sense for the country. It helps us to distribute the wealth away just from the cities. From an environmental perspective, oh my God, the difference that would have on what we do. And culturally, I think we're ready for it now. We've had the experience. We know what it would take. So now is the time to make that happen.
Okay. Yes, you're right about the serendipity aspects. It's a very interesting and recurring theme in a lot of what you're talking about, but a lot of what other people are talking about. I mentioned earlier, didn't I, about that great quote from yesterday, you can't diarize serendipity. But there are, I've seen a McKinsey report where they're talking about, let's use technology to try and create the brainstorming routine. Routine is not the right word for brainstorming, but try and create a technological starter point for brainstorming, with the office or the workplace location being the finishing school, the finishing component. It's the destination for the final thing. Would you agree that we're moving that, in terms of what we're providing for workers to do their jobs, that we're moving towards that essentially reversal of how things used to be? We said, people often would have a away day to get out of the office in order to think about what they're doing. Now we're talking about reversing that. So the office is where you go for. The office is a away day, essentially, is what I'm saying. Would you say that's a likely thing?
Yeah, well, I think the potential is there, but again, there are some big changes that we have to make, and it's the same, example in meetings. So when collaborative technology, really started to kick off, and let's say it's the sort of early 2000s, and we've got, intranets and document repositories and all that sort of stuff. To this day, we still go to bloody meetings where people send us the stuff, and we sit and we read through the paper that could have been sent days before, and we should turn up to the meeting having read the material, ready to engage with other people to do it. And we don't, because for some reason we can't take that next step. We need to take the next step, and it's the same with these kind of brainstorms. We have access now to these amazing tools that allow us to collaborate together while we are remote, but to then use that pre-collaboration to really help accentuate what a face-to-face sort of collaborative experience might be. And that absolutely would be probably the best use of the office going forward in that world. So we've got to help people, get to that next step, seeing how the stuff works, seeing, what the technology could do to help accelerate that through. And I think if we move down that path and people start to engage with it, I think then the opportunity is there. But again, we've got to help people take those steps.
Before we go to the Q&A, I just want to put something which has kind of stuck with me, and I keep referring to it over the years. Back in the 1990s, we had video conferencing. Back in the very early 2010s, we had the idea of a video wall. So you could just simply have an office in Tokyo that's permanently there, and you could speak to them as if, it's someone right next to you. The technology has been there. Now, admittedly, people talk about how if this pandemic had happened 10 years ago, we'd have been in serious trouble because the broadband infrastructure wasn't where it would be. But the technology for video conferencing, the technology that would mean the death of distance, the idea of not traveling to meet people, to go to exhibition. If you look at the commercial side, the exhibitions and conferences that we have, they're thriving. People want them. And so my sense is that there is a human dimension to this, which is the hardwired elements that it's going to be more difficult to unpick, whether that's a demographic thing, whether it's to do with the age of people. One of the questions we've had in is that on the FM side, it's an aging workforce, and how do we square this with the need to push horizons to create this new world? It's now time to attract new blood, which certainly it is, but there is a demographic component to it. But do we miss something with this, or do you think that this last 4 months experience is going to fundamentally change things?
Well, I think it will fundamentally change, but again, let's be really careful. This isn't a binary thing, right? So this isn't, we're never going to have any more physical experiences. It's only ever going to be online. But is instead of thinking about where does online work and where does physical work? And that's the experience, the difference that's happened over the last 12 weeks. And the irony for me is, literally, I have been screaming at not so much you, dear audience, but your organizations about the opportunity for flexible working. And everyone's like, yeah, Dave, I get it, but nobody's going to do it because the inertia. Remember the first time that you did a video call and just the inertia of you hitting that button to turn the camera on, oh God, I feel a bit weird and, maybe I'm a bit scruffy, or, it's just what the kids do. Well, you all bloody do it now. And even better, when we turn on our TV at night and we're watching the 10 o'clock news, even people like the BBC, who historically would have refused point blank to Skype somebody in or Zoom somebody in, it's the norm. And we're used to it and we get it. And that inertia has gone away. And so I think that's our opportunity. And to an extent, I would like to call BS on the demographic, that sort of the age thing for this, and only in the sense that historically we said, oh, this is just for the kids. Well, again, to my point, all of you, if you've worked in an office over the last 12 weeks, I guarantee you that you've had a richer experience with technology than ever before. Now, maybe the kids are doing it more than you, or maybe other younger colleagues are doing it more. It doesn't matter, right? But you're still bloody doing it. And that's the opportunity. And people have now got a level of confidence with it. And, again, they're still on a journey, but they know it works and they're okay with the foibles of it. If it's a bit rubbish or if the dogs bark, that's okay too. That's the opportunity for us going forward. And I would just love people to be able to make a decision, like, so based on the work I'm about to do, is this something I could do over a video call, or is this something I actually need to be in a physical space? And be okay with whatever the answer is, but only ever, choose the location based on what you're doing. Don't do it by, well, I always go to the bloody office on a Friday, or I always work from home on a Monday. That's not flexible working, and that belittles the opportunity that's in front of us.
But at the risk of, I want to go straight to Q&A. And by the way, for people who are watching live, I know that it said an hour, I think, on the holding screen. We were playing this for 40 minutes. We knew it was going to go slightly beyond that anyway. So just bear in mind, we are going to get to the questions in a second. But yeah, just finally though, you're talking there of routine. You're talking of human routine and how, I guess that's where I'm coming from, that, some of this is a shift, and you're right about, I don't think anyone's going to say they haven't seen or been more comfortable with the capability of technology over the course of the last 4 months. It's totally changed that. But then there's things like routines which are specific to the individual, like commuting. The commuting is being like the on-ramp and the off-ramp into your working day, where you charge up and you charge down, and getting rid of that and then putting the onus on the individual to be responsible for that. And having managers try and control that to make sure that their well-being is maintained. These are fundamentally different shifts, and this is all happening at the same time. That's not a question.
No, absolutely. But the point is, Martin, it's all happening at the same time, but it's all happening to everybody.
Sure.
And that's the important thing. So historically, with flexible working in particular, even though the company may have a flexible working policy, different people would activate it in different ways. And, it was always me. I was always the guy who was never in the office. And I used to worry about the conversation being, well, Dave's just doing his patio. I mean, we never see him. What does he bloody do anyway? Well, actually, everybody's had the experience now. Everybody's had that opportunity. And so they can now form their own opinions on what works for them. That's massively important and massively valuable going forward in terms of what we do. And it brings us right back to where we started, which is the challenge that you guys have is there's a spectrum that you've got to provide for, and you've got to figure that out, right? And it's going to be a different spectrum for different organizations and different cultures, but that's the journey that you've got to go on to make it work.
Sure. Okay. A good point at which to move on to the Q&A. Next slide, please. Oh, we're already there. Fantastic. Don't worry, I'm there. So let's see what we've got. One from David Green here, talking about the culture shift in adopting video calls or getting used to them, I guess. Is there a risk that this is influenced heavily by being in the same boat? Once returning to a scenario where some are at home, i.e. relaxed and informal setting, whilst others are in the workplace, i.e. corporate and formal setting, could this added dynamic of different environments negatively impact the progress made in adopting the new culture? Very interesting question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and absolutely it can. And we saw a little bit of this before. If you typically had a team who was mostly in the office, and there would be the oddball, probably me if it was my team, who wasn't in the room. Quite often the meeting would be going ahead and you would have remembered to print out a copy of the document for everybody, but you hadn't sent anything to the people not in the room. This whole sort of culture about the diversity of attendance and being able to cater for people connecting in different ways, that's going to be crucial going forward. And I think people who are remote need to be as cognizant of the people in the office as the people in the office need to be cognizant of the people who are remote. And so we need that culture to make meetings work well. The nice thing again is the fact that we've all had that experience. In my historical experience, half of the people who were ignoring me because I was online had never worked offline. They hadn't been in that situation, so they don't know what it's like to be on the thin end of some crappy telephone connection trying to figure out what's going on in the meeting room while someone's tapping their papers away on the microphone or whatever. So it's that culture and etiquette, I think, is what evolves, and that's what again, from your perspective as a group of sort of individuals, that's what you've got to look to embrace and encourage.
Okay, that's great. Moving on to another one. This from Tina Poole, I should say. Do you think we will move away from large open plan spaces to smaller local work hubs or vice versa? Actually, there's two things there. I mean, obviously, I know your views on open plan generally, historically, and obviously, the irony is that so many of these open collaboration spaces are being closed down at the moment. But she says also towards smaller local work hubs or vice versa. Well, I guess if you take away the open plan space, you're reducing the volume of space, and in itself, it's a trigger for moving out to smaller premises. So what do you think?
Yeah, I would hope so. And look, I get the paradox of open plan. I mean, as an employee and someone who likes to be productive, I've made it pretty clear that open plan offices are terrible for that kind of thing. But I get that they're cheap, and I get that that's how you achieve density and all that stuff. So I think we've got to be really thoughtful about what we do. I think what will help us, and will help you guys actually, is for the first time ever, we've got some scientific evidence to say that open plan offices are bad. From a pandemic perspective, open plan offices are terrible. So we know that not just COVID-19, but we are going to be in a world of pandemics will happen from time to time, and I don't want to be a doomsayer with that. So actually, we need a different approach to open plan. We need a different approach to office density, and organizations are going to have to invest in that. They're going to have to work with us, with you guys as an audience, to figure out how do we solve that problem and what do we need to do. And I'm sure that there will be a middle ground. Look at what retail's doing right now about figuring out the social distancing rules, and there's a difference between me sitting opposite to you, me with having my back to you. All that stuff we'll work through, but let's do it from a principle of let's get to the right answer, and that includes being cost effective. I get that, but also looking at productivity, but also sort of a medically safer way of putting a large number of people in the same space.
Speaking of medical, the next question from Paul Cartwright is about how can we combat potential claims through long-term orthopedic workplace injury if you have no control over the workplace? I'm not sure if that's one you can necessarily directly answer, but you can see his point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this part of we talked about it a bit earlier, it's the part of the cultural change, I think, that will have to happen. There are always going to be people who are either actively mistreated or believed to have been mistreated in terms of their workspace. It's a risk that organizations will have to manage. I would argue, and it speaks to where I always come from these things, which is a bit of a lovey, but if you're in a situation where the individuals feel empowered in their organization, they feel like the organization is really helping them, leaning into them, the chance of those events happening, I would argue, will reduce over time. They don't get eradicated, but they get smaller. So I think, again, this is about, if the culture of the organization is right, the risk is managed to an extent. Now, that might be naive of me to think that organizations can do that, but that's the world that I would rather we lived in. Fair
enough. And listen, just to manage expectations, I've got a couple more I'm going to put to you before we wrap, so just be aware of that. Maybe a third, but let's try this one from Kieran Murphy. Where do you think the blocker is currently now for flexible working, and what do you think we need to do to move this forward? Is it the skill of middle leadership, middle management, I guess, to manage output? I guess there's a combined, there's a number of things in there. From a flexible, so I guess this is about the typical manager of a displaced team, and what the trickiest thing is for those individuals having to manage them.
Yeah, and Kieran, I think that's a really great question. And you know, the blockers that used to be there were typically the inertia of just getting people to do it, right? They've gone. The challenge now is, and it is those, you know, and I hate to generalize, but it is those middle managers. And if you think about it logically, a middle manager typically is the individual with the least experience in managing people in the organization. And these typically are the least confident in what they're doing. And as a result of being less confident, you tend to rely on command and control more than you would do empowerment. So there's a learning and development opportunity for organizations, which is to help those managers become more confident, help them understand how to manage through the outcome of people's work rather than the process of people's work. And I think, again, if the organizations where we've seen this work, well, even before sort of COVID, is where the leadership of the organization really engages with that middle management layer and gives them the tools and the confidence to be able to lead in the right kind of way. I think that's the stickiest wicket that we'll be on for the next few months, as organizations manage that alongside the ambiguity of, you know, different people having very different needs and requirements and even states of mind about the workplace. So I think it's management, but also it's this the variable nature of what you've got to cater for now.
Okay, and listen, I'll wrap with this final one. This is from, hang on, it's Anita T. You mentioned the role of facilities managers will be more complex than it is already. What will be the biggest challenge for FMs post-COVID-19, and what skill will be paramount to execute the job? I guess we've kind of covered those, but if we can finish with those two things, the biggest challenge and the most important skill.
Look, and again, Anita, really, really good question. I think the challenge you face is about ambiguity. And you're going to have a lot of people looking for a lot of different things. And I think your challenge is how you navigate through those things and find out what the right answer is. And so that leads me to the skill. And I think the skill is really about engaging with the outcome. Comes back actually a bit to what we talked about in terms of outside in thinking. So how would the employee feel? How would the leader feel? What is it they really want to do? Look, they've asked me for this, but actually take a step back. What's the outcome that they actually want to do? And I think if you can think about that outcome and have that as your guiding principle for what you're trying to build, and then this sort of open-mindedness to be able to deal with the ambiguity, and resilience probably is what I'm really talking about, is the resilience to be able to work through that ambiguity. I think you're going to do fine. I think you're going to be great. And we need you. I mean, you know, that's where I would love to leave this, is like, oh my God, we need you now more than ever to help us get this right. Because, you know, it's almost on your watch now in terms of creating this capability to make this work. So no pressure, right?
There's a point to end on. Fantastic stuff. Dave, thank you very much for your time. Let's move slides, please. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, Dave is one of the stars at the IWFM Conference on the 25th of September. Megatrend 3, technology. Don't ask me what the other megatrends are. I know there are megatrends there too. So look forward to seeing you there, Dave. Listen, this is the point where I ask about Rise of the Humans. I know that's the Rise of the Humans background behind you. Another episode today. What's Rise of the Humans about, and what's happening tonight?
So Rise of the Humans in general is about how do we help all humans live up to the potential of technology. We talked about it a lot today. So actually, look, the tech's great, but unless we can change what we do, it's kind of worthless. So I started up the live stream a few weeks ago, really helping people who we're all looking at how do we emerge from lockdown and build whatever is our new world. So every Wednesday, 6 o'clock on YouTube, just do a search on Rise of the Humans, you'll find us there. A whole range of conversations. So last week we were talking about leadership. Before we were talking about mental health. tonight we're talking about the role of digital agencies and about how their understanding of what makes great marketing is actually going to help organizations do great transformation. We'd certainly love to have you as part of the audience.
Well, I would say, having obviously gone through most of them, they're perfect lockdown content. They're just over half an hour in length. Yeah, heartily recommended. So yeah, please do give Dave's Rise of Humans a shot. Right, if we can move to the next slide, please. Yes, indeed. So this is us in wrap-up mode. Please, if you haven't already, fill in the Impact and Experience Survey 2020. That's live now. And you see the link on the screen there. If you can't take a copy of that, absolutely go to the IWFM site and you'll find it marked from there. But we're taking in your entries, your thoughts now. As ever, it's a particularly important year. So, you know, absolutely please give us all your thoughts. Next slide, please. Yeah, the Insight Hub. There's a lot of good material here. The IWFM reports that we mentioned at the beginning of the program is one of those that you can find on here, but there's so much. There's good practice guides. There's all the various insights from just the last 3 or 4 months alone in the various reports, but there's plenty for you to get your teeth into. So as you see, research reports, guidance notes, a lot of very good guidance notes. It's all there. Please go to iwfm.org.uk/insight. And finally, I think finally, there might be another one. Yes, obviously there's a COVID-19 hub. Of course there is, and it's constantly being updated. It's not just reference material, it's what's going on generally speaking. And I heartily recommend anyone make use of these hubs. This particular one has got so much good material. Moreover, if we move to the next slide, we're asking for you to have your input as well. So if you've got any questions or you want to share case studies about your experience of exiting lockdown, this is the place to go. So please get in touch, because Peter and everyone at the Institute is constantly looking to evolve the Institute's best practice content, and this is the ideal time, obviously, with so much going on, to do just that. So again, I think that's it, isn't it? If the slide doesn't change, oh, here we go. Yes, this is the last one, I believe. So that's the end of this particular episode of Turbulent Times. There will be an 11th episode at this stage, this time next week. I believe there's an international component to that, what the COVID-19 pandemic has meant on an international level. So that'll be well worth tuning in for. Finally, again, Dave, thanks for your time. And I think that's it. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thanks, guys.